Rinkside with Emma Miskew and Ryan Steves.
Welcome back to another episode of Rinkside. This is episode 5 in what is really shaping up to be a fun little project for Emma Miskew and I, as we pull in some experts in the field of sport and are really looking to grapple with some of the more apparent issues that come up in the youth sports world, as our listeners now know and followers are now figuring out. This week, we're really fortunate to have someone who's risen to the top of his field. Last week, we heard from Sarah Wilkes, part of Team Homan. And this week, we're hearing from, we're really excited to welcome into our studio, Ian Mortimer. Now, even if you don't know the name Ian Mortimer off the top of your head, Ian comes to us and brings his perspectives from the canoe kayak world. Ian was a world-class paddler, as you'll hear in a minute, all about his career and his achievements, up to the highest level of World Cup stardom. And as he exited, I suppose his career, Ian went on to do what so many former athletes do, is find ways to give back. And so Ian has been working with Canada's top athletes in the paddling world in a development role, and then more recently as a chief technical officer for Canoe Kayak Canada. And so some of the things that I'd love for Ian to one of the reasons why we asked Ian to join Emma and I in studio is to share a lot of the same perspectives that we've been getting into with people like Brendan Bell in episode 1. Even Jason Boivin, and while Ian's not a professional in the psychotherapy, mental performance consulting, what you'll find with Ian is he's an expert in almost everything. With his experience, Ian can certainly shed some light on what it takes to get to the top, including what it takes to stay at the top and the mindset that you need as a high performing athlete. And so I think his comments and views will really resonate with families, especially with young children. Just from a preparation perspective, injury recovery. Ian's got some really interesting stories about overcoming injury and getting back to the field of play or the ice or whatever sport you might be in. So super pumped. Ian's a friend of mine. I've seen him in action as a coach. We're very fortunate to have someone like him take the time to step up and help us out on Rinkside. So we hope you enjoy today's episode. And once again, thank you so much for joining us. Ian, welcome to Rinkside.
Thanks so much, Ryan. Thanks, Emma.
Yes. Ian has had an incredible career in the canoe kayak space, the paddling space, I should say. Mm-hmm. And in recent years, post-retirement, you've moved into the development side of things for Canoe Kayak Canada, and mm-hmm. now are serving as the chief technical officer, doing amazing things, helping these athletes accomplish so much for Canada. Whenever I think of Olympics and in the international stage, I think of canoe kayak and just how incredible our athletes are in that. And so as I've come to meet you, the man and part of the team behind this, it's even more impressive. So maybe you can walk us through what it's like to be at the helm of such an accomplished group of athletes.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan, and thanks, Emma, again. And I mean, I describe it really as a real privilege. I don't want to say privilege in my lifetime because I'm only 41. So, but certainly when I'm making decisions, I often frame to myself that this is an opportunity I'm only going to get once in the sport that I love. Working with just an incredible group of people that are really dedicated. And so, I mean, knowing, just like in curling or in hockey, Ryan, that mm-hmm. there's a super passionate, engaged community across the country, from young athletes and their parents to development coaches to high performance coaches, and knowing how much they love the sport and how much they expect us to do well, that I do really channel that into energizing myself and being mm-hmm. dedicated and doing the best we possibly can. But I would just describe it as a privilege. It doesn't, as Emma knows from a life in curling, it doesn't come without costs to work in the sport that raised you and all the people that grew up around you. But always on balance, it's worth it for me to take the community where I think we need to go and lead them in that journey.
Now, the athletes are so fortunate. We've talked about this, Ian, to be someone from that sport and to have given so much to a sport and have all the context around what it takes to rise and really fulfill, I think, your goals and expectations within a sport. You have to have been there. And you certainly have. You've won World Cup titles, Pan American medal. You've competed at the highest level, represented the Maple Leaf. What was that experience like? Emma, I just heard Emma talk about this, and Sarah, the weight that comes with that, especially in a discipline that maybe Canadians pop in and out of. You know, when we see Olympics, it's just such a focus of the Summer Olympics and how we band around our athletes in this space. So what was it like to wear that for the first time?
I mean, it's probably similar to Emma. The first time I was lucky to go to the Junior World Championships and race for Canada. And I think when you're young, it's a bit different. I think it's actually kind of wild how much you feel it's make or break when you're under 18 or whatever the junior age is, just because it seems like you have one chance, and you're also 17 or 18, and life is not full of a lot of context at 17 or 18, which is the beauty of it. But I just remember being first relieved that I made the team after I'd worked so hard at it. Like that sort of, Ryan, like the famous phone call early in the morning for World Juniors, but in hockey. But I think every time subsequently when I did get to wear the Maple Leaf, especially when I came back from injuries and you know, when you have some time away from it, you do appreciate it more and more every time. And even now, I feel like now I appreciate it more in hindsight than I even did at the time when I was doing it. And I know Emma's nodding. You know, when you have time away from being at the top, you do really relish it and appreciate it more. But I think I remind the athletes every time of that perspective that I've gained, is just reminding them that it's a privilege, and to take a beat when you get off the bus or push off the dock or get on the plane, to remember that you're lucky and it's a privilege, and just sort of, it is nerve-wracking and it is stressful. And I think you make a good point, Ryan. Whereas, you know, there's lots of pressure for everyone, but paddlers are used to racing at competitions with maybe 2,000 or 3,000, 4,000, 5,000. Locally or nationally, it's friends and family and a little bit of the wider community. And then to be in, for example, in Paris and have, you know, 65,000, 55,000 people on the shores, it's a huge, like, aggressive increase. So you have to prepare for the pressure that you feel you have that moment. So it's a bit different than maybe what Emma goes through, being mic'd up, you know, for 50% of the weekends of the year. So you get used to a little bit of different pressure. But I think the cool thing about the games and those high pressure moments is it is very unifying, because no matter the sport, you do deal with that pressure, but the privilege as well. So
I love that about the privilege. And I mean, I've been there too, where you kind of just go on autopilot for a long span of time where things are kind of going well, but you're not really taking it all in and appreciating it all. And then when that time either ends or comes to a break, you're like, wow, I really didn't appreciate how amazing it was to be part of that. And I think there was a Scotties in 2017, and we had a couple of years where we couldn't win the Scotties and go back to Worlds. And that year we really just tried to like embrace everything, like embrace the crowd, embrace the fans, embrace the fact our family's there, like everything, every moment, the ice, looking around, taking in the whole thing. And we played so well and it had so much fun, and win or lose, we would have looked back and had such a great time. So I love that that's something that you not only recognize, but teach. And because I think that's something that so many athletes don't even think about. They're just trying to win. It's all about winning.
Yeah. And I think, Emma, you're so right. Like there's a way to be in that space and be even more like dialed into winning, but in a way that fuels you in a positive way. So you're just as committed, you're just as dialed, but when you're appreciating the support, you're also appreciating the process, and those are tied together. And with maturity, or I don't know how mature I really am, but with the time, you can see more and more how you steer, when you steer into the positive and you steer into staying present on the process every single step of the way. It like you actually get a lot closer, but you don't have as much of that monster under the bed mentality, which I call it, is when you think about the outcome, what you're doing is thinking about how am I going to be ready when I tackle that thing when I get there, instead of tackling it a little bit each day, but enjoying those little battles and those little steps along the way.
You said something there, Ian, that I always preach to my young athletes, which is focus on the process, not the result. And, paddling, curling, very process-oriented sports, I would think, where that is such an important message for kids. When you get so focused on the result, it's almost impossible to achieve. Is that something that you've learned now coaching, or did you know that when you were the athlete? I wish I could have been a coach long before I was a player. I've always said this. The clarity, I could have been so good had I been able to be a coach and then go backwards. I think we all probably feel that. Was that true? Did you know that, Emma, Ian, when you were young? Focus on process, trusted, hearing adults say that?
They'd say it. I think,
I know.
like those words were thrown around. But until you really think about what that means and find strategies to implement focusing on the process and being able to disconnect as much as you can from outcome, it's impossible to completely disconnect from an outcome. It's always going to be there because you have a goal. But to be able to think about what those process cues are comes with training. So it took me a little bit of time. Those words were thrown around a lot, but it took me some time to get there.
Totally.
How about you, Ian?
I think I learned a bit as I went. I think, like I talked about being 18, and then when I was a bit older and had been through some things, I remember a real moment for me was because paddling's outdoors, so it's an obvious thing, but you have to deal with different conditions. And so I remember, it sounds funny to say out loud, but one day I realized I'll never be able to control the weather. And I actually had that thought. And it really helped me from there on out to think of things that way, So if the wind's coming from a bad side for me, or it's because in canoeing you can have a left wind or a right wind, and it can affect you different ways. But that moment when I accepted I'll never control it, so I'm going to be the best at handling it and focus on that part of the process. And I remember, I think both of you can probably relate. You have these moments that kind of help change and come back to remember to realign your thinking, and that was for me. A little dose of wisdom I got when I was maybe 27. Sounds pretty late in my career, but I think I do, to your first question, Ryan, I do really try to apply those lessons when I work with the athletes. And there's some athletes, like Emma said, some athletes you can tell once and they'll remember that. And that's that vast, vast minority of athletes. And then you kind of have to infuse an approach where you're focusing on what you can control in the process into all the language and all the workouts you're doing to try to hit the athletes that are going to learn in a different way. But I think Ryan, you're not alone that, when you look back, you have this received wisdom you wish you applied, but I think that's sort of the curse of the human experience more than sport. But I think I do really try to reflect on how I can infuse it back, but also how I can hit the learning style and the sort of the wavelength of different athletes of different ages and different backgrounds and different just who they are as people within our team.
One of the things that I struggle with most now as a coach and constantly finding new ways to improve is motivation. Motivating kids or young athletes to find ways to be their best. Ian, I'm going to put you on the spot. I dug up an interview you did. And it was a line that I feel like Michael Jordan could have given, or Kobe, or any great athlete that's been there and done that. And you said, work really, really hard and never be shy to work harder than everybody else around you. I don't know if you remember saying this, but it was so profound to me because it really simplifies things, especially for young kids. And what a great message for young kids that don't feel, and it's as simple as this, don't feel silly working really hard. Don't feel silly being out of breath or falling. Just work harder than everybody else around you. Don't be afraid to do that. Anyways, sorry to put you on the spot, but I thought that was
it's a good memory. You're bringing back good memories, actually, which is nice. I think, I mean, I remember that mindset, and when you're from a country like Canada, it's especially applicable, right? So what I mean by that is when you're developing as an athlete, you're going to be in a geographic area that you're going to see the competition you see to a certain level. And in some sports, it happens earlier chronologically in your age, but you're always going to be around a group of people that is at the level they just are at around you. And as you both know, and especially Emma knows, like there's a big world out there, and there's someone working really hard somewhere in the world. And your competition, if you make it where you want to go, your competition is not going to be who's at the Ottawa curling rink or the Rideau Canoe Club, or not even at the Scotties or even at the national championships in canoeing. Like so it's important, but there's more to that, as you say, Ryan, especially working with young athletes, is there's so much social pressure in the pressure cooker of a training group or a team at younger age levels. And, when young athletes can crack out of that social pressure and find the confidence to push as hard as they can, take risks, what they might brand as looking silly in practice by messing up a drill but also just that social pressure of actually excelling and facing pushback from those around you that wish they were in your shoes. Like as you both know, it's a pressure cooker, but I think the more we can create spaces where that's normalized and okay, actually just floats our performance across the board. And especially in Canada, where there isn't one training camp where everyone can get together at 13, 14, 15, 16. And so you have to spread a message like that.
And at that age, they're kind of competing against one another within the club. Am I wrong there?
Totally.
So then how do you navigate coaching athletes that are somewhat in individual buckets that are all going to be competing against each other, that are all have that same goal? I always have wondered how that would go.
Yeah. Great. That's, not surprised. That's a super perceptive question, because that's not just the club issue. So like we had 2 women in the final at the Olympics in C1 200 meter racing against each other from Canada who are on the same team. And so it is something you foster as you go. And it really is a difficult area. And there's times it breaks down, but our message, or my message, has always been that, we have the people around us the best to make the best training groups in the world. And when we're training together, we're going to push each other to be better than we will be from our different parts. But what I've learned is this balance of aligned training and then individualization for each person within the aligned training group. And it's a lot of work. It makes the coach's job hard, but it builds the trust needed to be able to be competitive head to head, but also have that individual support. I just came from San Diego from our training camp there. And so Sophia Vincent was 6th at the Olympics. Katie Vincent was 1st at the Olympics in that event. And there's practices where they're training side by side, riding each other's wash, pushing each other. And that takes a lot of trust from both of those athletes, but also trust in us and the ability for us to communicate and deal with issues. But it is something, as you say, Emma, you got to learn early. You got to try to learn that early, the way to do that. But imagine coming into a national team at 18 and you've never been in that environment. And it can be a big learning curve and culture, something we have to keep our eye on with culture for sure.
Yeah, that would be tough. And I imagine you're navigating that well, but I feel like that would be tough also not to show like favoritism towards the top contenders versus the up and comers. Like that's just, I admire your efforts in navigating that coaching role.
Yeah, it's tough.
One thing I want your perspective on, Ian, and I'll simplify your sport here into a time-based sport. That's how I would look at it, right? This is a time-based sport, but there's so much that goes into that, right? And selecting the athletes and placing them where they belong. What are some of the more intangible things that you look at with athletes to predict that success, to position them for success? I would have some in hockey, and I'm imagining there's probably a lot of overlap between baseball, soccer, other sports, team sports. But what are you looking for? Chief technical officer, direct development. You've got all these things going on. What are you finding? Maybe what are the things that you look for, and what are the things that you see actually predict that success?
Yeah, I mean, the outcome element is the races, and so I look at it I talk about the inputs we put into training and the outputs we see from the training or racing, and so the ultimate is the times on the water and how we do in racing, and so there is sort of a profile of athletes progressing on that pathway, but the reality is that at earlier stages, there can be quite a cluster of times, a pretty broad time outcome that you have to look at the inputs and where athletes are at. I describe, like a video game like Mario Kart, and the karts have different like agility, speed, acceleration. Yeah. Like all of us are like that in different areas of our life. So I talk to athletes about that, and I say, we look at the different things. So specifically what we look at is really like, first of all, like adherence to training. Like how consistent are you in the training? You speak to motivation, Ryan. You spoke to it, and motivation is good articulated, but it really isn't much spoken. It's shown through the consistency of training, the ability to hit the targets for kilometers in training, to hit the number of hours needed, and then the accompanied balance that's needed for athletes to do that. So when they're coming through school, when they're finishing high school, heading to university, are they able to balance the other needs, social, school, family, with the ability to finish, like to hit all four corners of the training that they need to finish. And we see over time, yes, it's simple in terms of time, but it's like any sport, it's a huge range of inputs that have to go in. So as much as like any specific one level, are they able to consistently manage their life, manage it so that they can progressively build that? So specifically, it's a lot about training, and it's a lot about the how much aerobic capacity work, are they hitting their strength inputs? But we do look much more holistically at are they able to balance things so that as we add a load, there's not going to be a breakdown for this athlete.
I hope people listening can extrapolate and apply that to any other sport, because what you just said is so eye-opening. I didn't hear one thing about a technical paddle stroke there. Right? You're talking about so much more that influences that, which is the thing that propels them and separates them. But that's a really good lesson, because when you say the four corners of the athlete, that's also really interesting. I'm just imagining what you mean by that. Maybe you can describe that and simplify it for the average sport family and what you mean.
Sure. Yeah. And I mean, we have tools that we actually use for this. So we meet with athletes on our pathway annually every year to go through their whole athlete development profile to look at all these areas. But what I mean by four corners is sort of their physical development, their tactical development through races, their emotional and psychological development as they progress year over year. And a lot of those are not, especially at early stages, outcome based, but are they able, like I said, to balance and even identify goals they're working on in those different areas and work towards them? Because it's like teaching anything where you're seeing, are they able to learn and grow, and are they able to process, grow, learn, apply that consistently through the training. So simple example is being able to warm up properly. And so if you set a goal with a young athlete, 15, 16, 17, let's do proper warm-ups, because we know from research and just how much of a difference it makes to properly be ready. But what if an athlete can achieve consistently on their own, self-motivated, in their training group for proper warm-up? What does that tell you? They can manage their time well. They understand they're going to have to do a bit more than maybe those around them. They understand like strength is not about just the outcome of their bench press or their heavy squat or deadlift. It's about their core strength and those things. And so those are the kind of things we work with early in the pathway to see, are you switching on that there's more to this than the like Instagram glitzy, cool moment, and that there's these building blocks that we have to understand together.
Emma, you'll like this. We had Ian was one of the assistant coaches with my younger son's hockey team this past winter. And the coaching staff brought in someone at the height of Rugby Canada, and his comment was, I forget what it was, Ian, do the non-Instagram moment, be the non-Instagram moment, right? Do the thing that's not the sexiest ending, right? Do the things that build to that moment. I thought that was awesome.
Other than it being totally lost on the 9-year-olds who are now like whatever Instagram social media they're on.
Yeah. But the parents were like, yes, love it.
I mean, it's also so true, because for your body to work as a unit all together, there's a lot more to it than just the heavy lifting or the deadlifts. It's like about using everything at once. And that it's same with curling. Like, it's not a sport where you're just in one power position. You have to be able to do everything. You have to be flexible. You have to have good mobility. You have to have good balance. Like there's so many things. And it's the same in canoe kayak as well, with like the balance element, the core strength and all of that. So there's more to it than just the glamorous shots at the gym.
That's right. This is a real issue that I find with hockey, anyways, being around all these little hockey players all the time, is that there's much more of a culture now of watching highlights, watching TikTok packs, watching to have an athlete now sit and watch a whole hockey game, for instance, which you learn so much watching versus the TikTok pack, right? So I don't know how much that's impacting other highlight-based sports. Yeah, I would assume, Ian. I would assume. Yeah, and it's a huge detriment because we're seeing now athletes that aren't as equipped to understand the game. They all want to do the fancy play, right?
It's all a balance, right? And I try to look at it that way and not be too like I get what you're saying, and I'm not accusing you of negativity, but there is a factor where you have to accept it. It's part of the popularity and how things grow, but I do find there's a couple issues with it. One, the world we live in with that type of media is people creating instant experts and people feeling they have a lot of expertise and deep knowledge based on things that, are outcome based or super high level, like what I call like the cherries on top of a sundae. And like, we don't even have milk from the cow yet. Like we're not even close to making ice cream. And we're talking about, I think my child needs this boat or this paddle or this broom and, like this kind of stick, right? And it's like we're not even skating, doing skating fundamentals. And I think it can skip it, but I do think the flip side, the hard part, not of the motivation, like the motivation to see the outcome, and then also just that sort of ground level fact of social media that it completely omits always 95% of every story, and 95% of performance is hard work no one sees. So I try to flip it on its head and actually use it as a teaching tool, because there's an anxiety about social media. Everyone, including young athletes, feel that they know that there's a truth underneath that, and that basically sport is not about the world social media inhabits. It's something much deeper. It's about commitment, hard work, and getting like progressing with slow progress with commitment. And I think it's a positive that sport can, for young people, fill that anxiety. Like it can fill a gap we all feel, but you got to crack through layers to get there of other draws. And unfortunately, it's also, some athletes and some young people won't be drawn to sport the same way they were in the past, because it's just a reality that there's faster gratification elsewhere.
Yeah. Nice. Before we let you go, Ian, you've been so generous with your time here, but before you go, I want to ask you something that I get asked a lot, and I'll give my buddy Roger a shout out for this because he's a loyal listener. One of the topics is injury recovery, right? And dealing with injury. We asked Sarah about this. We got her opinions. But I'd like yours, because I know injury really impacted your career. It impacted mine big time, 2 shoulder surgeries. It's a really difficult thing to manage that often gets overlooked, particularly at the young ages, where you can feel so isolated. And it can really derail someone's, I say career in quotes, but it can really throw off someone's progression in their sport, particularly where it impacts legs and mobility and gait and stride and all these things. So as someone who dealt with a pretty bad shoulder injuries, I understand it, and hip and maybe cut your career short a little bit. What advice could you offer to young athletes facing similar challenges, and just how you deal with it and then how you come back from it?
Yeah, I mean, like all sports, we deal with this all the time. And I think, first of all, I do actually feel lucky sometimes that I was injured, in that I had shoulder and hip surgery, and it provided me with perspective very early, to come back from that. And now in my role, I think it helps me have perspective on applying that support. So the first thing I always say to young athletes that are hurt is that, well, first of all, we have support for you if they're in our program, and we have very generous chief medical officer, who is generous not just with our senior program, but with athletes in the pathway to help them, just so they know they're recognized and heard and triaged. But the biggest switch that I encourage very early is your training is now your injury recovery, and everyone will go through an injury, and I truly do believe you can and should come back from injury stronger than when you were hurt. It provides a pause for you to strengthen around those other sort of areas and four corners I talked about. It provides you with a pause, and it's really difficult. But you don't have a choice once the injuries happen, but you do have a choice in how you look at your recovery. And we're very intentional about long-term support. Not cutting anything short in terms of support, mental support, as well as physical, as people go through the recovery. But the biggest for me paradigm shift I encourage is training, maybe to this point, paddling, gym, flexibility. But now it's going to be flexibility, a bit of gym, and a lot of recovery. But we still send you the program, and that's your program. It's still in your training program. So you don't feel like there's still a pathway to your goal, but the pathway now looks a bit different until you can remerge on the highway and get back with the rest of the team.
Love that.
It's a great way of looking at it. I know it can still be challenging for these young athletes, particularly really young athletes, and how disruptive it can be to the family. But that's really good advice. Thanks, Ian.
Yeah.
Well, Ian, thank you so much for joining us today. Your tagline is really going to stick with me. I'm going to steal it. Work really, really hard, and never be shy to work harder than everyone else around you. That's my new mantra. Love it.
Yeah. Thank you
so much for being our guest today.
Yeah. Thanks, Emma. Thanks, Ryan. Great to see you both.
Okay. Thanks, Ian.
Yeah.
Really, really insightful. Good luck to you, Emma, as your season winds down. What an incredible season. Take this opportunity to really congratulate you and Team Homan on what a remarkable year it's been for you.
Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for listening. And we'll be back next week with some new content for you.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.